Welcome in, everybody, to another deep dive. Today we'll be looking at this really powerful memoir called The House of My Mother, A Daughter's Quest for Freedom.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I don't know about you, but I found it pretty intense.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
It's, I mean, for me, it was one of those books where you finish it and you just have to sort of sit with it for a while, you know,
definitely.
just to process everything.
Yeah, and the fact that it's narrated by the author, Shari Franke herself,
Well, actually,
makes it even more.
that adds a whole other level to it, doesn't
Yeah,
it?
for sure.
Because you can really hear, like, the emotion in her voice
Yeah,
as she's telling her story.
yeah. I felt like I was right there with her in some of those really painful moments.
Oh, absolutely.
It was.
And it's raw, you know?
Yeah.
She doesn't sugarcoat anything.
No, not at
And
all.
I think that's what makes it so powerful.
It's definitely not a light read.
No, it's not a beach read.
No.
It's a deep dive for sure.
Right. And the subject matter itself is heavy. You know, it's about Sherry's journey to reconcile her love for her mother with the pain of emotional abuse that she endured.
Yeah, and that's something I think a lot of people can relate to on some level.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, even if they haven't experienced that kind of intense abuse,
Right.
most of us have had some kind of complicated family relationships.
Right. And this book really delves into those complexities, doesn't it?
It does. And it doesn't shy away from portraying the duality of Sherry's mother.
Right.
Like you see this figure who can be so loving and caring 1 minute
Right.
and then turn completely cold and even cruel the next.
It's almost like you never know what to expect.
Exactly. It's that unpredictability
Yeah.
that really creates this unsettling atmosphere throughout the book.
Yeah, I remember that part early on where Sherry describes feeling like she's always walking on eggshells
Oh, yeah.
around her mother. Like, you never know what's going to set her off.
Right. And that kind of environment can be so damaging to a child's development, right?
Yeah.
Psychologists talk about how it can really hinder their ability to form secure attachments
Oh, for sure.
and to trust their own perceptions.
Right.
Because the world feels so unpredictable and unsafe.
Makes you wonder how Sherry even managed to function.
Right. It's a testament to her resilience, for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think that's where Franke's exploration of generational trauma becomes really important.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, she doesn't just focus on her own experiences, but she also delves into her mother's past,
Mhm.
trying to understand where those patterns of behavior might have originated.
Right. It's like she's trying to break down this cycle of pain
Yeah.
that's been passed down through generations.
And it's not about making excuses for her mother's actions,
Right.
but it's about trying to understand the context. You
Exactly.
know, like
Yeah.
what led to those behaviors in the first place.
It's not condoning it. It's
Or-
about understanding.
Exactly. And I think that's a really important distinction to make.
Yeah, definitely.
Because it's easy to just label someone as bad or
Yeah.
toxic, but often there are deeper wounds that are driving those behaviors.
Right. And those wounds can be passed down from generation to generation.
Yeah. I mean, think about that passage where Cherie talks about her grandmother's really harsh parenting style.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it really hints at this cycle of pain.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that's something we all need to be aware of.
Oh, yeah.
You know, like how much of our own behavior is influenced by the patterns we've inherited from our families.
Right. And that's what's so powerful about this book.
Yeah.
It makes you think about your own house, so to speak,
Mm-hmm.
and to consider the forces that have shaped you.
It's definitely a book that stays with you.
It is.
Like,
Yeah.
long after you finish reading it.
Absolutely.
And you know, one of the things that really struck me about this whole journey that Cherie goes through is this idea of freedom.
Right.
Like, she's seeking freedom, not just from her mother, but like
Yeah.
from this whole like, you know, way of being
Mhm.
that she's sort of inherited or been trapped in.
Absolutely. It's about breaking free from those patterns, you know,
Yeah.
those limiting beliefs and expectations.
Yeah, like she's shedding a skin almost.
Right.
You know?
It's like a metamorphosis.
Yeah, and becoming this like new person,
Mhm.
which I imagine is both exhilarating and terrifying.
Oh, absolutely. Like you're stepping into the unknown,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
you're leaving behind everything you've ever known.
Right.
But at the same time, there's this incredible sense of possibility.
Right.
Like you can finally be who you were meant to be.
So how does Sherry define freedom for herself?
Well, she doesn't explicitly define it, but we see it manifest in different ways throughout the book.
Okay.
Like there's a sense of agency, you know.
Mm-hmm.
She's taking control of her own life,
Okay.
making her own decisions,
Right.
and there's this newfound confidence in her own voice.
Like she's no longer afraid to speak her truth.
Exactly. And that's a huge part of it. Like for so long she's been silenced by her
Right.
mother, by the expectations of her family.
Oh, right.
And now she's finally finding her own voice.
It's like she's reclaiming her power.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's a really powerful message, I think,
Oh, absolutely.
especially for anyone who's ever felt trapped or silenced.
Right. And it makes me think about the role of forgiveness in all of this.
Yeah.
Like, does Shari ever truly forgive her mother?
That's the big question, isn't it?
It is.
And it's not an easy one to answer
Right.
because the book doesn't offer any simple solutions.
No.
Forgiveness is presented as this really complex process,
Hmm.
full of setbacks and internal struggles.
Right. I remember that part where Shari describes feeling like anger and resentment are these heavy chains,
Oh, yeah.
that are weighing her down.
Hmm.
And forgiveness is about breaking free from those chains.
Right. Not for her mother's sake, but for her own.
Right.
It's about releasing herself from the burden of that anger.
But is forgiveness always necessary for healing?
That's a good question.
Like, what if the other person isn't remorseful or doesn't even acknowledge the harm they've caused?
Right? I mean, that's a really tough situation.
Yeah.
And I think the memoir grapples with that very tension,
Yeah.
because on the one hand, you have this desire to let go of the anger
Right.
and move on. But on the other hand, there's this sense of injustice.
Right.
Like the other person hasn't been held accountable.
Right. So how do you reconcile those two things?
Well, Shari doesn't offer a definitive answer,
Okay.
but she suggests that forgiveness at its core
Mm-hmm.
is about finding peace within yourself,
Okay.
regardless of the other person's actions.
So it's not about condoning their behavior
Right.
or letting them off the hook.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that holding on to anger
Yeah.
only hurts you in the end.
Right. It keeps you trapped in the past.
Exactly.
And prevents you from moving forward.
Yeah. It's like carrying around this heavy weight
Yeah.
that's weighing you down.
And for Shari, that process of letting go of finding peace seems to be deeply intertwined with her writing.
Oh, absolutely.
Like the act of putting her story into words is like a cathartic release for her.
It's like she's finally able to make sense of her experiences
Right.
by giving them shape and form on the page.
Yeah, and in doing so, she creates this incredibly powerful narrative
Right.
that speaks to the resilience of the human spirit.
Absolutely. It's a story of hope and healing.
And speaking of that, one of the things that really adds to the power of this book is the fact that Shari narrates the audiobook herself.
Oh, yeah.
Like you can hear the emotion in her voice.
It's so raw and vulnerable.
It is.
Like you're right there with her,
Yeah.
experiencing everything she's going through.
It's like she's speaking directly to you.
Right. It creates this incredible sense of intimacy.
Yeah. And it really underscores the fact that this isn't just a story.
Mm-hmm.
It's someone's lived experience.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that makes it all the more powerful.
It does. I mean, I can only imagine the impact this book must have on other survivors of emotional abuse.
Oh, yeah.
To hear someone so bravely and honestly share their story.
It's incredibly validating, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, like you're not alone
Right.
in what you've gone through.
And that there's hope for healing.
Absolutely. Wow. It's a lot to think about, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. Definitely.
Yeah.
A lot to unpack.
It really is. I mean, even though the book ends,
Yeah.
it still feels like the conversation is continuing in a way.
Right. Like it stays with you.
Yeah, exactly. What about you? I'm curious.
Mhm.
What aspect of Shari's journey really resonated the most with you?
Well, so many things stood out to me.
Mm.
I think what really hit home was the whole idea of the house as a metaphor.
Yeah.
Like it's not just the physical house where she grew up.
Right.
It's this whole like emotional and psychological landscape
Yeah.
that she's had to navigate.
It's like she's trapped inside it.
Right, exactly.
Mm.
And breaking free from that house,
Yeah.
becomes this symbol of her journey towards, emotional liberation.
Right. Like dismantling those walls.
Yeah, all the limitations and expectations that have been holding her back.
And it's interesting how she kind of invites us to do the same thing,
Yeah.
like to examine our own metaphorical houses.
Right. To look at our own internal landscape.
And to really think about, what changes we need to make to create a more authentic life for ourselves.
It's a powerful message, isn't it?
It is. It's a real call to action.
Yeah.
Like, don't just sit there and accept things the way they are.
Right. Take charge of your own life.
Exactly. This deep dive has been so thought-provoking.
Yeah, it really has.
It's amazing how one memoir can spark so many, different conversations and connections.
It's true. And I think it speaks to the power of personal stories You know,
Mm.
like even though this is Shari's unique experience,
Right.
it touches on these themes that are universal.
Yeah. Family relationships, the search for identity,
Forgiveness.
forgiveness.
The resilience of the human spirit.
Exactly. Like
Yeah.
we all go through these things in some form or another.
Right. And to hear someone articulate them so beautifully,
Mm.
it's really validating, I think.
Yeah, it is. Before we wrap up, I want to encourage everyone to check out The House of My Mother,
Yeah.
especially the audiobook.
Yes, definitely.
Hearing Shari's story in her own voice
Mhm.
adds this whole other layer of depth and intimacy.
Oh, it's so powerful.
It really is. So, as you guys, process all this and maybe even think about picking up the book,
Yeah.
we'll leave you with a final thought to ponder.
Okay.
What if, instead of viewing our most challenging relationships as, obstacles or burdens,
Yeah.
we saw them as opportunities for growth?
Interesting.
Like, what if within those difficult dynamics
Mhm.
lie the seeds of our own liberation and transformation?
It's a different way of looking at it, isn't it?
It is. It's not easy, but as Shari shows us,
Yeah.
it's definitely a journey worth taking.
Thanks for joining us.
Until next time.